Welcome to the Spoilercast for Rehydrate. As a warning, this episode will contain spoilers for all of the Three-Body Problem, The Dark Forest, and Death's End. If you don't want to be spoiled on future events, please skip this episode. This is Season 5, Episode 4, The Storyless Kingdom, where we will be discussing the second half of Part 2 of Death's End by Liu Cixin. Also today, we have a special interview guest with us, Priya. Priya, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Priya. I was in last week's episode talking spoiler-free, and now I'm excited to be able to talk about spoilers finally.
And my name is Thalia, and I have also read all of the books in this series.
Hey, this is Dan. I've also read the entire series, and unfortunately, Amin is running late today, so we're going to get started without him, but he will hopefully join soon. So we're going to start with some follow-up. We did get some more emails from Frank regarding the last episode, so I wanted to read it here. And he brings up some interesting points, and one thing I totally forgot, which I should have had. So he says, you briefly mentioned the 2001 Space Odyssey movie in your latest episode. The space logistics description in the section where Changxin meets Yuan Tianming also reminds me of that movie, as well as Arthur C. Clarke's novel 2001 Space Odyssey. The style of that section of Death's End is so like Clarke's, it's uncanny. In addition, I don't think you mentioned in the podcast an even more explicit reference to 2001 in Death's End in the final 10 minutes before the droplets strike the Earth's gravitational wave antennas. Quote, then humanity appeared. Compared to the eons before, mankind's history was but the blink of an eye. Dynasties and eras exploded like fireworks. The Bone Club, tossed into the air by an ape, turned into a spaceship. So I had this in my notes, and I totally forgot to mention it. I mean, 2001 is my favorite movie of all time. So, like obviously it stuck out to me too. Like that's very obvious. And I meant to mention it, but just totally forgot. Yeah, I think we all know that like the Liu Cixin is very influenced by Arthur C. Clarke and Asimov and all these classical sci-fi writers. So definitely an homage there. Very explicit one. The second point he makes is something that he brings up is I like the discussion regarding who Captain Longsail is supposed to represent. This Easter egg is not directly related, but I'd like to just point out that Guan Yifan is written as Guan in Chinese, Yifan, where E means one and Fa means sail. Extrapolate this all you would like to, given how the story ends, but I'd like to think this is a coincidence. So it is interesting that the character matches. Thalia, you know this stuff better than I do, so I guess is that
I didn't realize it was that fun. Yeah. I'm just looking it up. Yeah, it literally has a little dangling cloth on one side and then a radical that is used in all the boat words. So it's really like it's a sail. It's possible. I mean, since he does end up with a certain princess, maybe the wrong princess at the end, it's possible that it is a coincidence or it's not. I always like when people point these out. So thank you, Frank.
Yeah, thanks, Frank.
I also saw a Reddit thread on that subject, and I think like the two theories were that either it's just the author kind of like winking to the fact that like that's who she ends up with, because the sail is also connected to Yuan Tianming because he doesn't he go out
solar sail?
Yeah, the solar sail, right? Yeah. So it's sort of like it's not intentional, but then someone also speculated, like, what if Yuan Tianming has reached a place, or the Trisolarans have this ability where they can see time as not in a linear way? Have you guys seen the movie Arrival, where the aliens can see like time, like the future, past, present, all at once? They can't influence it, but they can see it. So I thought that was an interesting idea, and now I don't know if I've like spoiled Arrival, but
oh no, that's all right.
Well, you'd have to be like in the dimension above seeing time non-linearly to actually be able to affect it, right? Like we can.
So he couldn't do that while remaining in 3D. Okay,
that's my understanding currently.
So
if someone wants to enlighten me on true time travel, I am open to taking feedback.
All right, so we'll just do a brief summary of what happened in this episode, just so we're all on the same page. Starts out with Trisolaris being destroyed. Changxin, Luoji, and Sofan meet again for the Way of Tea, and Sofan confirms that it's possible to broadcast a cosmic safety notice. Sofan interrupts Changxin's suicide attempt by saying that Yuan Tianming would like to see her. And unable to provide any direct evidence on how to help humanity, Yuan Tianming recounts a series of fairy tales that wrap up the answers in multi-level metaphors. And finally, humanity tries but gives up on trying to decipher the fairy tales and decides to embark on the bunker era instead. So I know we have a lot of notes around the fairy tales, but is there anything we'd like to discuss outside of those before we get into that? Because I mean, the meat of this episode is going to be discussing that. But there is a fair amount that happens ahead of that. So is there anything that you guys want to discuss?
So yeah, I think I was last in the spoiler-free episode, we were talking about, or rather speculating why the Trisolarans are reluctant to give helpful information to the humans. It seems that if humans acquire, do we know where the Trisolaran ship is at this point relative to the solar system? Because it seems like the curvature propulsion lines could become a problem for them potentially. And then it's also interesting to think of the Trisolarans as having recognized that maybe humans might want to seek vengeance upon them because they're the ones who kind of started this whole thing in a sense. So those were the two theories as to why the Trisolarans might have been reluctant to give helpful information.
I think it has to do with the fact that of what Guan Yifan reveals about galactic humans, and I think that might extend to all galactic species. And I think that is essentially what Trisolaris has already become at this point, is that the one thing they did not inherit and cannot learn is appreciation of life. And that any life that's out there in the cosmos, whether you believe it to be seeking vengeance or you're not sure if it's going to be benevolent or malicious, you just automatically have to distrust them.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's also one line in the book that says, I think it takes 5 minutes in outer space in a harsh situation for people to lose their humanity in a sense. So yeah, that makes sense too.
Their trisolarity.
Yeah, I wonder if they're just afraid of giving even more information about their world was already destroyed by this master race of Singer or whoever. And so maybe they're worried about that race also going after their fleet, right? Because that's also a potential threat for them in the dark forest. They're not planetary species anymore. They're a galactic species, but they have light speed ships and that seems pretty dangerous. So and that's why they talk a lot about the Trisolarans waited a year or two before they entered Lightspeed because they didn't want to have the trails anywhere close to their planet, right? Just to not reveal themselves. Presumably they're going Lightspeed right now and leaving these big trails behind. So maybe that's why they're reluctant to give any information. But it is strange that they just did not get any of they didn't pick up on any of the stuff that Yun Tianming was throwing down there.
Yeah, it seems like Yun Tianming has very intimate knowledge of who Singer is, and that seemed a bit odd to me. It seemed that because Needle Eye, we'll get into that, but it seemed very much like Singer, but maybe he is referring, there are likely multiple entities out there in outer space like Singer.
Yeah.
It's kind of, doesn't Singer kind of reveal that his civilization is not the one that destroyed?
Yeah, he sees it and it's already blown out.
Yeah, so he's about to destroy it and then he sees that it was already destroyed, right?
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah, he sees, I think this is the theory that's been pointed out on Reddit as well. Singer destroys neither Trisolaris nor Earth.
Oh really? He's not the one that...
We can talk about it in the Singer chapter.
Oh, okay, maybe I misremember that. I thought he did flick the 2D foil. Wasn't him?
It's elegant, but we'll discuss it in the Singer chapter.
All right.
I want to talk about the fairy tales. That's all I can say. They were by far the most interesting part of this chapter. Does everyone agree?
Yeah, but first, it looks like Amin has joined us, so welcome, Amin.
Thank you. I apologize.
Oh, no problem. So I actually had a question for Amin before we get started. And Amin, you you had accidentally read ahead. I was wondering how far ahead you read for last episode.
I read through the end of part 3 or part 4, whatever. The next one is across 2 different parts. I read to the end of that part.
Where does this part end? Where Changqing goes back into hibernation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and she gives her company away.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can see how you think that was a lot of reading, because it is a lot of reading.
Yeah, I didn't follow directions well.
It is hard to split up the chapters in the middle. I will admit to that. Yeah, so before we were just about to jump into the fairy tales, but did you have anything that you want to discuss? Or, I guess you know more than we do, than we do for the episode, but is there anything you want to discuss before we just jump into the fairy tales?
No, I want to talk about the fairy tales too.
Great. So I did a lot of research ahead of this, but ahead of the main episode, and I kind of like split up like the non-spoiler stuff into the main show, and then the stuff I considered just spoilers into the episode. And I had to play dumb a lot, so like when I'm you're listening to me on the main show, like I know a lot of these things. I'm just trying to like not say that I know them, and then like give Tim like more information, because I already felt like I kind of spoiled a little bit talking about how the fairy tales are more important than just because like this episode ends with like, oh, like fairy tales aren't important, let's just build a bunker, right? But the fairy tales are extremely important going forward for a whole bunch of different reasons. So that's why I was playing kind of dumb. But anyway, I have a couple. We can start with some things that I found on Reddit. We just talk through them. So the first one is a quote that I have here. So it says, in summary, we have a princess in danger of being flattened, travels to a land of the dead to find some entity stranded there who does not respect the 3D geometry. This entity is immune to flattening, at least as Needle Eye understands, and uses extraventional powers to defeat Needle Eye. I believe that these stories have a lot more in them, and that Leo intentionally only hinted at, but may have held some secret to humanity's at least temporary survival. I go back and forth in my mind a lot, but like, who is what, whatever. But I think one of the major ones is Prince Deepwater, right? Who doesn't follow the perspective of time. And maybe it's not a person. Maybe it's like the ring, because like the interesting part is like in the ring, like when they come upon it, like it just like kind of pops in, right? So it doesn't really follow the same laws of dimensionality. And so a person in 3D, which is Needle Eye or someone, is now able to attack someone in 4D, right? Because like people in lower dimensions aren't able to harm people in higher dimensions unless they're brought back down to lower dimensions.
So I have a question. So I thought some of the stuff in these stories, like about people being painted and being rolled up and all that, to me that was, I guess, was that an obvious connection to the 3-body problem game from the first book, or do I know more than I should, and that's why it was kind of really obvious what they were trying to get at with these stories to me? So because again, I have a terrible memory and I know more than I should, I wasn't sure if this was, I guess, how much of this is obvious to a first-time reader and how much of this is well constructed and well hidden from a first-time reader. And I know all of you are way more familiar with the books than me, so maybe I'm asking the wrong crowd here.
Oh, we're not that much more familiar though. Like we're only a couple of chapters away. I'll say for me personally, I did not like. I knew that is important, and I was like trying to like look for meanings, but I definitely didn't catch like anything that was like not explained already. Like I didn't catch like any of the dimensionality stuff or light speed stuff, or I think I didn't even make the connection to the 4D stuff at the time. So, but I knew it's important, and that's why I really like how right after it they like start deciphering it. I'm like, okay, cool, they're gonna like tell us what the answers are, which they do in some ways, but not totally. How about you, Priya? Like, what did you understand did you catch more out of the fairy tales when you first read it?
I think I caught like certain overarching like concepts. Like I knew it had to do something with like dimensionality, but I think on a reread I could sort of clock more of the metaphors and draw more parallels to actually what comes before, which is the part with the ring, which is a lot of the language is evocative of that that whole passage with the ring. And it makes me wonder if actually the Trisolarans also came in contact with the ring at some point and asked it questions and had a similar conversation, because so much of it is kind of almost like borrowed from what the ring tells the human ships when they encounter it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, definitely on reread, same as like it. I think like there's so much that's revealed after the like curvature propulsion and the 2D attacks and that kind of stuff. Like that kind of makes the fairy tales more not obvious, but like kind of reveals more about them when you read them the second time. But I think the first time I didn't get it. So I think like I don't think you're really meant to fully understand it the first time, and that's why it's cool, right? Like the humanity has to like collectively try to decipher them, but humanity is kind of dumb and doesn't do it and just goes back to what they know.
You mean you guys you couldn't tell it was curvature propulsion from like the get-go? Like, I'm just kidding. I couldn't tell you.
Man.
I don't think anybody could.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to imply I got everything, but at least the dimensionality stuff I thought was very telegraphed. And again, I guess I was maybe looking for that, or for some reason it just seemed, that one seemed way more obvious than any of the other ones to me.
For myself, I definitely didn't take it as a metaphor for anything that was specifically unique to Earth. Just that this is a threat in the great universe, and here are some things that we know about it, and, here are ways that it attacks, and, I'm enclosing some kind of solution. I definitely got that, but it was very fungible as to like any civilization that, is not powerful enough to already know this. So I didn't see it as specifically mapping onto particular characters or specifically mapping onto Earth. And that was probably my first impression, which is also what I got from The Ring. I have the idea that if they'd contacted any of those 4D ships, it would have told them all of this pretty identically.
Although I think what I would say is that from the passage with the ring and also the encounters with these 4D fragments, we're kind of almost on the lookout for anything to do with 4-dimensionality that we're not even really thinking about, like 2-dimensionality. So like when you first read the paintings and things, you're trying to figure out what the painting is a metaphor for, but that's like the least metaphorical element. It's kind of literal. So you're not really trying to, like, you're trying to turn that into a metaphor when it's actually not. And I was looking on Reddit and I saw various interpretations that say that Prince Deepwater is actually already 2D. The clue for that.
I could see that.
Yeah, the clue for that comes from how Singer's homeworld seemingly has deliberately turned to 2D. Or the way that he describes it, it seems like they made a decision to turn into 2D so that the dimensionality attacks would not impact them. So it seems like, and then the other clue is when Master Ethereal says he didn't teach Needle Eye the Eastern style.
That was the other
painting.
Clue, yeah. Because it doesn't actually make them immune to this attack. It makes them immune to like a 2D attack, but not immune to a 1D attack. So Eastern versus Western.
And it lacks, 2D lacks depth perception, I guess, right? So I the way that I saw it now after like going further into the book, which I had already done, but then I reread certain parts later on and it seemed that, let's say like light speed had not worked, then he was proposing that as another avenue to explore another safety mechanism, although I feel like that's such a long shot that he would think that humans would figure out how to turn themselves 2D before they could figure out light speed. So that doesn't make a lot of sense, but I feel like he was just like trying to plant these seeds of thought into their minds.
That's interesting. I wonder, if that is one of the cosmic safety notices that he tries to, because I don't think that, some people seem to think the umbrella represents the black domain, but I don't know. I don't.
Let's talk about some features inside the story. Like, what about the umbrella? So we have this umbrella made of bones with pebbles at the end. What were your thoughts?
Yeah. So I think it's definitely important that it came from the faraway land, the Harishigan Moshigan. It comes from there, and it doesn't work if you put foreign parts into it, and it has to constantly spin, not too fast, but not too slow. So the one thing I found online was that it maybe is supposed to represent a black hole, which kind of makes sense with when they get to the maelstrom, right, for the next chapter. And you need the constant, the velocity to escape the event horizon of a black hole. I don't think it's supposed to represent a black domain, but it does protect them. So maybe, my main thing, I guess, I think is that it's supposed to represent light speed, right? And they're supposed to represent being able to get away fast enough and being able to accelerate out of, past the velocity needed to get out of a black hole, which would be light speed, right? So that's where I was coming from on that one. But I'm open to other interpretations because the umbrella is still kind of a mystery to me.
I think a lot of these metaphors can simultaneously represent different things and different concepts. So I think like one concept is obviously like motion, right? Constant motion. And the other, I think the clue that tells me that it also has to do with the black domain though, is that it's made from an abyss dragon, and the word abyss immediately puts in my mind the thought of like a black hole or a black something, right? Like, so a black domain seems to be represented by the idea of it being made by an abyss dragon. Also the fact that an umbrella kind of covers you, it kind of shrouds you in like a shroud of protection. So that also made me think of what the function of the black domain is. But yeah, there's also that motion aspect of it. So, but all of these ideas are sort of related to each other. Like the black domain is a byproduct of light speed. So
yeah, and I wonder like, why can't the umbrella protect more than one person? Like, why doesn't that work?
Because sacrifices need to be made in fairy tales, Dan. That's why.
Is that what it? I mean, like, that seemed like too important to just be a fairy tale construction to me. The fact that like Master Ethereal couldn't use it at the same time, like two people can't use the umbrella at the same time.
Yeah, I put this in our notes about Master Ethereal because he reminded me of Luoji at the end, because they both have this opportunity for survival, for extending their lives, and they both choose to give it away and choose to go out with dignity. They go out in a poetic, dark way on their own terms. So,
oh, that's very interesting. I hadn't even thought of that. Yeah, that would be a good stand-in for Logi.
Mm-hmm.
I thought the reason that it couldn't protect more than one person at a time is sort of his way of saying potentially that you're not going to be able to get everyone or even the majority of people out this way, because everyone else who kind of stays behind is going to be stuck there forever, basically. Not that they're going to, like, if the safety notice works, they're not going to be turned into 2D, but there is this thought that like only a very, very small number of people are going to be able to get out. And I don't think that the one is necessarily supposed to mean one individual, but like a very small amount.
But a very small. Yeah, I could buy that.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. So the next note I had was something that's like occurred to me like right after we recorded for last time is Prince Longsail. I think to me, it's supposed to represent Yun Tianming because like he literally sailed out of the universe on a sail, right? Like, so, and he later makes his way to rescue Chengxin from the collapsing star. So I think that is supposed to represent him or himself. Or is it, sorry, not Prince Longsail, Captain Longsail, sorry. But yeah, like the sail thing, I'm like, oh yeah, of course. And I think we mentioned in the main show, like they end up together, right? And so like and they're saying they're going off to faraway land, and like, you know, he knows that he's going to probably buy her this pocket universe if they develop light speed ships, right?
So if the Trisolarians are so smart, wouldn't they catch on to all of these?
You know, there's a part of me that wanted to believe that he had struck some sort of a deal with the Trisolarians. I was like, okay, I'm going to want to share some stuff with her, but what if I make it so convoluted in this fairy tale? Then is it okay? Because like the Trisolarians did show some willingness to share something with Logi, which was that yes, a safety notice can be broadcast. We're just going to tell you yes, no, or maybe, or I don't know. And this is kind of the fairy tale is kind of like the equivalent of that sort of a very vague answer to what the solution is. But where that theory kind of falls apart is that Tianming starts the fairy tales by making up the fact that Chengxin and he knew each other when they were kids. So that kind of like interferes with that theory of mine. But it's like almost like he's like, well, if I tell it to her in a way that will be almost undecipherable, can I tell her this story?
It could be has like a person on the inside too, right? Like someone like the listener from before who has a different mindset. It wants to like he wants to save humanity, and so maybe he's able to make friends with that person and, you know, say like, I'm going to tell them this fairy tale, but it's actually going to be this thing, and then that's the person who reviews the transcript and says it's okay or something.
Yeah, or maybe the guy controlling like the light switches is a pacifist, you know?
Right. Well, it seems like the guy that controlling the light switches is not, right? Because like they immediately like tell him, like, even when they mention the meteorites.
Yeah, but those are like more like very like on the nose kind of things, like giving away like secrets of like, that paint a picture of Trisolarian civilization to humans that they might not want revealed. But with everything else, he's probably like, whatever.
Yeah, I guess it's like it's the question is like, what's the real danger, like we talked about before, to Trisolarians of giving up this information, and how much are they willing to give out? Like, they said at the face of it, they gave out the cosmic safety notice thing because they have so much respect for the OG, even if it's like detrimental to the survival of Trisolarians, right? But maybe they think they're also being watched. They can develop sophons who are watching humans. Like maybe they think like 4D creatures or 5D creatures are watching them, and so they're trying to make it look good or whatever.
Oh, that's interesting. That's a good theory.
Almost everything you said was over my head, but it sounded good.
I'm just making it up. I'm making I'll do the next fan fiction book about the politics of 5D.
There's the idea that like higher dimensional beings don't really pose a threat to lower dimensional beings, and we realize that like Singer's civilization is originally 3D too. He refers to all of them as low entropy entities. I don't know, like the only threat in my mind would be like other 3D beings after rereading the Singer chapter.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the Trisolarians probably also don't want to be two-dimensionalized, right? If someone flicked a 2D foil at their fleet, it would pretty quickly take it two-dimensionalize it.
I had a bit of a bone to pick with this whole theory about two-dimensionalization.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if it belongs here. I'll probably bring it up again to gripe about it on the main show, but it's revealed later that the Earth and the solar system, rather, were two-dimensionalized, and that's a sign of respect, right? That this is like a higher, a more deadly attack than a photoid, right?
Was it respect or just because they said like, the photoid won't work. We can see the other planet's going to block it.
That's what my problem is, because Guan Yifeng is like, that's a sign of respect in the universe. But then if you look at the reasons why, it's like, oh, actually, they could build a bunker, so better just do plan B. Right. So I didn't really think that it was necessarily an indicator of respect, rather just the geometry of the system. But we can talk about that later, because the fairy tales, at least to me, were really engaging. Like you talked about, was I trying to read metaphors into them? I thought my experience paralleled Chengxin's. I tried, but then they were just engaging on their own.
Yeah, that was the same feeling I had during my first reading of it. When I went back and read it over again, I was like literally trying to find metaphors. But when I first read it, I was kind of like, every time I would start trying to find the metaphorical revelation in them, I would just be like, but it's more fun to actually read them as what they are, because it does have like this enchanting quality to it that kind of takes you kind of into almost a realm of like a fantasy world outside of like hard science fiction. So
it felt like what the Constantinople chapter was trying to be. Like, it was very fun to read,
Yeah, I wasn't really into the Constantinople chapter, to be honest, but I was very into the fairy tales.
Yeah, I remember with that when I read it the first time, like I read it, then finished the book, and then immediately I went back and read it again, like the fairy tales chapter again. And then after I finished reading that, then I listened to the audiobook version of the fairy tales. It was like, because like I think the coolest thing is that like I knew I couldn't understand I didn't know what all these metaphors meant or whatever, but I knew they meant something, and like that and they meant something cool and scientific, right? And like the combination of like fairy tales like that are wrapped in scientific metaphors, just like they were like the perfect combination for my reading brain.
Yeah, it's a winning combo.
And then that, like I said on the many times, like this is by far not by far, but this is my favorite part of the whole series. Not that it goes downhill from here, because there's a lot of cool stuff that happens after this too. But like,
keep listening, please.
I had never been as like, I had never been like as like just like mind blown. Besides like reading this chapter or these few chapters. All right. Well, my next note is around Prince Iceland. So this one I think is also, I still don't have a good answer for this one either. The main characteristics of Prince Iceland is like that he's super brutal, just like lusting for power. So coming from the perspective of Yun Tianming, who has embedded himself with the Trisolarans, like maybe this is the Singer race, because like this person's always like looking to destroy, or that this race is always looking to just destroy stuff in the dark forest. Or maybe Singer is Needle Eye, I think like Priya mentioned, and he's just the instrument of destruction, and this is the race that is directing him to do it, and maybe that the race that's directing him is Ice Sand. Maybe that's not really a spoiler thought, but that was just like my further thinking on the matter of like who Ice Sand could represent. I think in the main show everything said humanity or even Wade, but I think that's too small. Like it seems like it should be a bigger metaphor.
I think it's just the hostility of the nature of the dark forest, because it's almost like we see that even within these organisms, these beings that are just kind of set out or stationed in areas where their job is to put forth these strikes. There are individuals like Singer who aren't completely like heartless and like, or just like programmed to kill, because you see him singing songs and he's having thoughts and he's like actually intrigued by the communications that have taken place between Trisolaris and Earth. So and then it's the elder who comes in and cuts that line of thinking off and says, no, your job is just to strike this civilization out, and that's what you need to do. So I think that's sort of representative of Ice Sand, that maybe there are all of these like the lower level like employees or so aren't really think they might be interested and they might actually want to find out more about the civilizations that they're stationed to strike out, but it's higher orders dictate that they just need to destroy, and so that's what they're going to do. And so that's what Ice Sand represented to me, I think.
Another interesting thing that, as I was reading further, is how they found, when they're looking at when they found the Trisolarans left the lines, the death lines behind them, or the lightspeed trails. They said they had saw like a lightspeed trail just like right outside the solar system. So and it seems like these attacks happen really fast in relation to them getting the coordinates, right? So maybe these races are using light speed to get to those places, or maybe even but no one can see them ever. Maybe it's that, or maybe they're actually using maybe they're actually higher dimensional beings who can pop in and out of these bubbles, or can use them. That was another thought I had, as with a little bit more knowledge of the book going forward. Because they seem godlike, right? They're just out there all the time and just right on top of it. So they have to have more. It seems like they have more ability than just light speed.
So I have a tangential question. Well, I guess I have two tangential questions. So one is, how many of these do the humans solve? And then secondly, when they solve them, does the author give an explanation of how they solved it, or is it kind of vague? We're doing a lot of speculation here, so I'm just wondering, is nothing about any of this explained, how they came to any of these conclusions? Like the umbrella, for example. I'm guessing that one, they never figure out what it means.
They actually do figure that out very definitively, and since it's Liu Cixin, he takes us through a pretty rigorous process to explain it. So
the
that
umbrella?
At least you can put to bed. Oh yeah.
If you think the umbrella's light speed, curvature propulsion, I guess.
No, I mean, it's representing this motion regulator that's on steam engine trains from the 19th century. That part. And that's something that's a bit of a stretch even for a common era person. You'd have to be kind of an enthusiast to know that. And I mean, that's, at least to my mind, very definitively solved.
That always struck me as also kind of too specific, though. I don't know.
It was brilliant. I thought it does exactly what it's supposed to do. It regulates a constant speed, and it points you in the direction of constant speed in any circumstances, and that's light.
That all ties into, if the umbrella is supposed to represent the black domain.
Well, I don't think it's supposed to represent either specifically, because both plans of survival, you need to have a really good scientific understanding of how to manipulate light and light speed. And I think that's all that it's pointing you towards.
There's also a lot of exposition at the end when Chengxin and AA are kind of flying off in the Lightspeed ship, where Logi kind of breaks down a lot of the concepts of, there's this really great line where he describes the black domain as a noose, where it's a threat if it's a threat if you're dangling it in your hand, but it's like a safety notice basically if it's around your own neck. So so too close and it's around your own neck, and that makes you safe because and then if it's too far, then you're kind of like you're gonna put it around other people. So
I think the main answer, I mean, is that like they're not, I don't think a lot of them are explicitly called out, but they kind of become obvious in context, I think, later on. Like definitely like the painting people in the pictures, I think, becomes obvious because they two-dimensionalize the entire solar system. And so like that,
it's not a metaphor.
Yeah. So like that kind of stuff I think becomes obvious, but he doesn't have like a checklist of like, well, this meant this thing and this meant that thing. I think that's another reason why these are cool, because they're not just like spelled out for you. Like they're still up for interpretation. So we can do shows like this where we can still debate about like what means what, or kind of make wild guesses.
Amin wasn't here for this part of our discussion, but we talked about why the Trisolarans might be hesitant to give the secret of this cosmic safety notice to humanity. And humanity speculates, but it would shroud us, it would make us safe to the cosmos, we'd have to mutilate ourselves in some way. And even in Priya's example, they're saying, why won't they show us how to put a noose around our own neck? But if we think about the actual implications of making a black domain, Luoji explains you need to have about 1,000 light speed ships all going in different directions at very powerful ships. Those are bound to interact and be more of a threat. So that there's a very reasonable explanation. Is like, well, maybe I don't want to arm my enemy with 1,000 ships all going in different directions.
It's never like laid out like, oh, well, this is what that metaphor meant. This is what that metaphor meant. But I think later on, like certain elements are brought back up, like curvature propulsion when Loji explains it, and then Ching-Xin remembers her sailboat experiments, and so some of the elements are unraveled that way for us. But it's never like he doesn't go metaphor by metaphor to give us like a very clear-cut explanation for what each metaphor stands for. And I think he can't do that, right? Because each one seems to be doing a lot of work within the scope of the fairy tale to kind of represent multiple concepts at once. So it would kind of almost be, I don't know, like over explaining everything.
Maybe one day he'll release his notes from when he was writing the book of like what things, and be interesting read there. Yeah, I think another one like you mentioned was the boat, like that's a like the soap bubbles. Maybe not soap bubbles, but like using the soap to drive the boat, that kind of like obviates like and then also like how the boat like when it uses the soap to like leaves its wake with like the Lightspeed trails. So like there's a lot of like those things that kind of, that when you're reading them, I think another reason why the fairy tales are great, because like you read them and be like, oh yeah, like in the fairy tale, like they left a wake of in their way. And like it's also, I mean, I guess we can get into the soap now. It's also interesting that it pacifies I mean, I think pretty obviously
it slows things down.
Yeah, is that I think, oh, I didn't catch that. That's a good read.
Yeah, anything that's left in your wake, like their light speed is going to be slower. They're going to have to work a lot harder to get out. I don't know if it's mutilated, but they're certainly pacified.
I guess I was taking that as like, something to do with the safety notice, because it's like it's pacifying the dark forest. But yeah, that makes sense. Like, yeah, maybe it's not so literal that like they're being pacified, but like you said, they're in reduced light, so they're just pacified that way.
And even when humanity starts testing, or when anyone starts testing light speed, they run into a problem when they have curvature propulsion. It's like, well, we did this test, and then the quantum computers nearby broke. So like their technology level gets lowered if you're in the wake of these tests. Like there are real consequences.
Right.
This is a bit out there, but another theory that I read on Reddit about the soap is that it kind of evokes the feeling that humans get when they find themselves in 4D space. Like they feel a lot of or rather, they realize how they felt in 4D space once they come back down to 3D space, and they start to feel claustrophobic and uncomfortable. And the soap gives them a more comfortable feeling. So someone was like, yeah, the soap is also kind of referencing the feeling of 4D space. And of course, there's a theory that he might be kind of signaling to them to seek refuge in 4D space, maybe. So that's where they were connecting the dots there with the soap. But if I can make a bit of a further leap, since we were trying to look for clues about the pocket universes in the fairy tales, that's the only thing that seemed like it could be evocative of pocket universes to me, like the soap bubbles. I know that it probably doesn't have anything to do with that. And also, we as the reader don't know at what point the Trisolarans figure out how to make pocket universes. Yeah. So it's possible that at the point when Yun Tianming wrote or conceived of the story, they hadn't figured that out or even had that idea yet. So it's likely that it's not even in there. Yeah. But when I think of multiverses, it seems like multiple bubbles within a membrane or whatever. So that's the only thing that evoked the idea of a pocket universe to me, like a soap bubble.
Maybe the pocket universes are the safety notice, right? Because you're outside of the universe, then maybe that's the only way to. I mean, obviously you can't fit a whole civilization in there, but maybe the soap is saying oh yeah, you're saying all those bubbles represent pocket universes, and they don't realize that the danger it presents to the universe at that time. But maybe they're saying oh, you need to create a bunch of these pocket universes and store your people in there, and then that way they can't be attacked because they're outside of the universe, right?
If they can't make a light speed ship, you think they can make universes?
Well, they could seek out people who could, right? So maybe that's what they're saying. You need to go across the sea to seek out these creatures that, because obviously the Trisolarans are either in contact with them or are looking for them because they kind of know about him somehow, right? Or maybe they don't, or who knows what the the timing is. But maybe they're saying by going across here, you're creating all these bubbles with the pocket universes, and then that's how it pacifies the dark forest.
So I have another question for people who haven't read everything. So do they experience pocket universes in this book somewhere? So
yeah,
I assume they can't create them themselves, but they must come across them.
No, they can't make it themselves, but they do come across them. So basically, Yun Tianming, he gives Chengxin a pocket universe to go into, and they're supposed to go in together, but they never do, unfortunately. But Chengxin does go in them. So yeah, we see them, and that's it's basically the very end of the book. It's the last couple chapters of the book, and that's where she writes the excerpts from Pass Us Out of Time from inside the pocket universe.
I have a note for Amin, actually, since we talked about what's at the end of the book, and we talked about Master Ethereum and how he goes into the painting and gives away his umbrella. And I was wondering if at this point, when we're much closer to the end than we are to the beginning, if you have any thoughts about the title.
Death's End? That title?
Or that mean? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think we talked about this a long time ago, but it's that people are going to live forever. That there is nobody dies anymore. I think that's what we talked about.
We haven't seen anyone live forever yet, but yeah, maybe.
Well, I think it's just the hibernation, right? They mentioned it in the first episode or first couple chapters. They talk about hibernation being a means to death's end, right?
I mean, at the local scale, maybe.
Yeah. do you mean a universal death's end, or
Yeah.
I guess how do you mean
it? My understanding of the meaning of death's end definitely changed a lot, especially towards the end of this book, and I was wondering if Amin's had evolved yet. I suspect that it will by the end of the book. That's all I'll say.
I don't think mine had. Maybe unless you mean the universe collapse or potentially collapsing or not or the heat death of the universe, the choice between those two things.
I don't know if Thalia is thinking in the same line as I'm thinking, and I don't want to inform Amin's interpretation by revealing what I think, but I think well, at least I am not thinking of end as like the end of a thing, like death's the end of death, but rather the end being like, when you say a means to an end, like what end means in that phrase, that's how I'm thinking of end. Like death is more of a, how should I explain this? Death, imagine if death is like a character in the story, and the end that death brings unto the story. To me, that was kind of summed up in like how the planets are kind of flattened in the end.
Or I think that was similar to me. Like so much of these books are driven by like our intense fear of mortality. The Trisolarans will come and attack us in the first book, and then all of the universe could attack us and we could die in the Dark Forest book. But by the end of this one, there's so much more exploration and so much enormity about the beauty and dignity of ending. Like the stars will end, but also this whole dimension will end. Even if things are continuing to live and they found like eternal energy, like we think that Luoji thinks that humanity has found eternal rechargeable energy, you could potentially find that, and still that wouldn't save you. Your whole dimension could end, and even the universe itself. Like maybe the zero dimensioners win, and I think they sort of obliterate the meaning of death by the end of this. It's sublimely cathartic for me to read this book.
Yeah, that was way more eloquent than what I was trying to get at. But I was having similar thoughts to what you said. And there's also, and I know that I'm like repeatedly encroaching into the Singer passage because I just love it so much. In the end, when Singer flicks the dual vector foil, he says that he liked the unyielding tenderness displayed by the dual vector foil, a kind of aesthetic that could turn death into a song. And that sort of is evocative of the title to me, because it's kind of like death almost becomes a character, and this is the end that death brings to an entire portion of the universe, and ultimately maybe the whole universe, right? And then also death kind of becomes like obsolete once you have like traveled like billions of years into the future as a human being. Even if you can die, right, you still have made it to the end of time in a sense. So it's like,
right.
mortality doesn't really mean anything anymore.
Yeah. Well, those are much smarter takes than I had. I thought it was just a hibernation thing, but that all makes total sense to me. Like, I think those are the themes. Like, I didn't like put them together explicitly. I think that those explanations all very much make sense to me. So I only had a couple more notes about the fairy tales themselves. So the one thing that was missing was the mention of the star, of Yun Taiming's star that he gave Chengxin. And I couldn't like put something that directly, like, I think he always had it in mind. Like, he says it right afterwards, the story, like that we should meet at our star, right? So he definitely had it in his mind. And then in the story, Captain Longsail and Princess Dewdrop go off somewhere, and presumably that's to their star. But I don't know where that somewhere is. Like, do you think that the star is represented in any of the metaphors here, or not?
I'm just thinking of this since you brought it up, but there's a moment, and it's kind of a really beautiful moment. I think that whole conversation actually between Captain Longsail and Princess Dewdrop, where they're having their first conversation, and he's kind of explaining that he's from Hershing and Milliken and just explaining things to her. There's this moment where she asks him, can you see me? And he says, yes, I can see your eyes. There are stars in them. I don't know, maybe that's like a nod to the star, possibly, because he's kind of, Captain Longsail is kind of like Tianming, and Dewdrop is Chengxin. So yeah, that just now made me think of like a possible reference to the star that he gave her, because he sees stars in her eyes.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
I just had a follow-up to something I heard on the main show. So since we are a week behind our schedule, I was able to listen luxuriously to the entire main show and give it some thought. And what I heard was there was a fair amount of discussion of mapping characters onto other characters. Like, is Prince Ice Sand Singer, is Princess Dewdrop Chengxin, which is brought up like explicitly in the text. they say, like, the princess sounds a lot like you. So I'd like to present my controversial hot take on which character actually symbolizes Changxin. My hot take was, instead of Changxin as Princess Dewdrop, her as Auntie Wide. And I'm willing to back up that assertion. One of them is that she is capable of producing practical solutions, even if they don't always work. Auntie Wide is the one who's like, I have an iron from Hershing and Mosikin. Let's iron out this snow wave paper. And it does work. It's not enough, but it does work. And Changxin is a practical PhD who came up with a staircase program. Changxin also says that she would hold up the umbrella herself, and Auntie Wide holds up the umbrella herself.
Yeah, she says, I'm not that delicate. I can do it.
Exactly. Not that delicate. And also there's a passage in the scene where Master Ethereum comes to the door and enlightens them and tells them, here's the nature of this attack, and you yourself are in danger, and there's no escape, and like, you can't run far enough away for this attack not to reach you. And Auntie Wide flung her arms around the princess as if she could keep her safe. And again, we've seen that that's Changxin's approach to humanity. She makes a stand on principle, even when there's no hope whatsoever. She throws away the button. She chooses to tell the Halo group to stand down and not threaten all of civilization. She holds a baby in the UN. Like, she's always flinging her arms around the princess as if she could keep her safe. And if you have seen a production of Romeo and Juliet, where Juliet and the nurse are played by the same actor, it sort of reminded me of that. Like, obviously expressing some more of these elegant, beautiful, princess-like qualities, and then fluttering back to, nope, I'm super practical, and I'm also full of care and affection. And I thought that was my hot take, which came to me in a dream after listening to the main show, and is not something I thought originally whilst reading this, but I wanted to present that.
I like it. It's so what is so in this theory, what is Dewdrop represents humanity, I guess, or supposed to?
Just something tender, something you want to keep safe, maybe human civilization, maybe parts of Changxin herself.
Yeah, I really like that. And I think actually that seems like a very originally you thought, actually, because I hadn't come across that anywhere. And I went down a deep rabbit hole in Reddit and like on not just Reddit, but like online, and there was no such interpretation anywhere. But I really like that because that we constantly do see these two sides of Changxin, where she has like this emotional side, and that could be the Dewdrop side. But there's also this side that's practical and very resourceful, and it's almost like Tianming kind of like presenting to her that these are, this is you, and this is, there are these two sides to you. And in the end, what I did comment on in the original, in the spoiler-free episode, which was that we talked about how she says that I'm not so delicate, and I felt that like even if the interpretation is that she's just Dewdrop, she's not just delicate, because she has this drive to kind of leave this world and to go and solve these problems. Even as Dewdrop, she has that intention. So she never seemed weak or delicate to me, but combining her sort of with this Auntie Wide element kind of only strengthens that metaphor of who she is. So I really like that. It was really interesting to me how the concept and the idea of story is presented, because normally when you think of a place that's storyless as like a literary person or when you romanticize the idea of literature and thoughts and ideas, you would think that stories are essential and stories are vital to a civilization. And I don't think that this fairy tale is debunking that idea in any sense. And I always go back to this book that Salman Rushdie wrote for his son. It's called Haroun and the Sea of Stories. And that explores, that's also a very fairy tale like story that explores the idea of stories as being so essential to any civilization or any society. And without stories, we're nothing. But it's very interesting that in the scope of this fairy tale, and what it's saying is that it's not necessarily that all of knowledge and all stories are a good thing. Like some stories are conflict, and the way that they're presented in this fairy tale is that when story comes to you, it can sometimes be in the form of a huge conflict, and it really makes you question, like, is it better to kind of live in a sort of blissful state of ignorance, or is it better to know everything that there is to know about the nature of the universe and the scope of the universe? And it's kind of like what we right now as humanity are grappling with. Like it's kind of like within human nature to want to go further and further and further out in seeking all the knowledge that there is to find. But it's like the language around the way that stories are presented in this fairy tale is like, we were better off when we were the storyless kingdom, in a sense. And then there is some pushback to that,
very
where
Taoist.
Yeah, it kind of shows both sides that, I mean, yes, like ultimately when like you could end up with a story that kind of flattens your whole universe, and then that's not a good story to tell, right? But it is a good story because that makes for like a really grandiose ending to this story. So yeah, these were just the thoughts that I had in my head around like stories.
Yeah, and they talk about at the end of it too, that like after that there was no more stories ever again, right? They like isolated themselves and so like never had stories again. Yeah, it seems like they like that state for whatever reason, or they makes them feel comfortable anyway. Like they don't, they like to be isolated and not have other stories.
Yeah, which kind of would have been a good, like a good for humanity type of ending if they had been successful in broadcasting a safety notice, and then if it had ended the way that the fairy tale ends, which is that Dewdrop and Longsail go away, and then they take all the remaining soap with them, which means they've left the curvature propulsion lines, and then no one else can ever escape again, and then they live out the rest of their days in blissful simplicity. And Shang-Xin does contemplate this in the end, where she's like, the people who wanted to leave would have gotten what they wanted if I hadn't put a halt to the Lightspeed project or whatever. And the people who wanted to stay home and just live in this, conflict-free world could have lived out their lives that way, and everyone would have gotten what they wanted. The two factions of people who wanted to stay could have stayed, the people who wanted to leave could have left, and it would have been fine.
Thank you so much for joining us this week, Priya. And thank you everyone for listening. You can leave us comments by emailing us at rehydrate@fastmail.com or on Twitter @rehydratepod. Please join us next episode for Season 5, Episode 5, Fate's Choice, the second half of Part 3 and all of Part 4 of Death's End by Liu Cixin.